Hi, I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report, and we're going to talk a little bit about plywood. Yes, Stacy.
Yeah, you are certainly hitting on a topic that is near and dear to many in America. Everybody has been posting their images of plywood and lumber and how much it costs them and the shock of costing it. Remember, we recently spoke about that on Keiser Report. But here are some new data points to look at. Soaring lumber prices add $36,000 to the cost of a new home, and a fierce land grab is only making it worse. So lumber prices so far this year, since January 1st of 2021, are up 67%. They're up 340% from a year ago. And, you know, part of the reason, well, we've discussed all the money printing that's causing inflation, and this is part of that. But the other part, of course, is with all the free money and stimulus comes the desire for many to move out of the cities. They don't want to be stuck in eternal pandemic lockdowns going on for the next few years. So there's a land shortage because very few people are who haven't been paying their mortgage for the past year or their rent to the landlord, there are moratoriums on kicking them out. So they're stuck in there. So this shows you up in the supply, the actual supply, why there's a record number of people trying to build new houses, because there's a shortage of supply of previously owned homes. There is a major shift in the market's composition due to the record shortage of existing homes available. About 1 in 4 homes for sale are now newly built, the highest share ever. Historically, new homes make up just about 1 in 10. But fierce buyer competition is behind that shift. Prices for new and existing homes are at record highs.
Right. Remember, when we did our first show of the year, we named 3 themes for 2021. Deglobalization, de-dollarization, de-Chinification. Now, here we are in the second quarter of 2021, and it's showing up. Because one of the primary reasons for getting inflation here is the deglobalization that has put America and China on an antagonistic footing. We've got a new Cold War here. And all the benefits that came to the U.S. economy by shipping all of our jobs over to China has now been used up, right? So now, because there's some antagonism and because incomes in China have now matched those of the U.S., that ability to hide the money printing through the labor sink of China is gone. So now you've got prices going up for real for stuff like lumber. And that's not, the Fed says it's transitory. Okay, I'm here to say that's categorically a lie. Because unless globalization picks up again, unless China and America start singing Kumbaya together and everything's all cakey, no. Shaky? No. Jakey, that's it.
Well, remember we were covering in the last episode, like the boom in GDP and consumption and stuff like that. You have to factor in these costs, like inflation is also baked into there. So if house prices are up $36,000, if that's up over 15%, you know, that's also factored into those numbers. So you're starting to see all that inflation in all of the numbers. And it's not just lumber, as they point out. Prices of gypsum, which is drywall, are up nearly 7% from a year ago. Steel mill product prices are at a record high, up nearly 18% in March, year over year. It's used for beams, sheet metal products, and wiring. And the price of copper also set a record high this month and is 27% year to date. I remember discussing copper prices that were soaring back in the 2008-2009 financial crisis. And that was also part of that supply chains getting knocked out during global financial crisis during, it was a liquidity crisis, credit crisis, right? Because nobody wanted to lend to each other. So the cost of shipping across the world soared. Now the shipping costs and freight costs are soaring because of, the fact that the U.S. economy is still shut down and only China is open, but the U.S. economy, the consumers have so much money now that they're buying all these things. And this is despite the lumber tariffs are still there that Trump introduced. So despite that, people are still they're paying any price. And Wolf Richter is always mentioning that, by the way, on wallstreet.com, that this is a mindset change, a psychological change, is that usually for the past 20 years. Like prices go up like this and people stop spending. But there is that hyperinflationary mindset. It's like they have to get something while they still can. Maybe they're also signaling, they understand that deglobalization is coming. So, we might as well get a new laundry machine now while we can, because, it might take a few years for factories to set up in America or an alternative to emerge.
Right. And the inflation numbers are understated, not for the reasons that we've talked about, like the absence of including things like healthcare and education and housing in the official CPI numbers. The government still says inflation's at 1.6% because they're trying to make it easier to lend money to Warren Buffett at 0%, even though they know, I'm sure, that it's running at 7, 8, 9%. But then when you factor in shrinkflation, so a lot of people are noticing that their 16-ounce beef is the same price, but it's only 12 ounce. That the Toblerone bars from Switzerland are missing some of the little pieces of the candy bar, right? It's shrinkflation. The prices are the same, but you're getting 10, 20, 30% less in the package. So when you add that together, that's now you're talking 20% inflation.
Yeah, but even the government, the Fed numbers, they did come out and say that the CPI did jump, but it's transitory and it's over 3.5% now. So they are it was a pretty huge jump. But in terms of the situation we find ourselves in, so we have the house prices going up, at least that's some domestic wealth effect, and versus all of that money, the stimulus checks that we're sending to China. But here's another interesting data point and chart that I saw this week that is part of that deglobalization, which is the Thucydides trap that we talk about all the time, that when a rising nation starts to overtake the previous big power, i.e. China overtaking the US, well, you see that in the numbers, and you see that, you could trace the hostility between the two nations actually also with this, and that is in 2019, the number of Chinese firms in the Fortune 500 overtook the number of Americans for the first time, the number of American firms. So here's the data going back to 1995 when there was 0. And then we elevated them to the WTO on favored nation status. And you could see that China has more bigger companies than American ones. To be fair, the article that they're linking to points out that a lot of them are state-owned enterprises, kind of like Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac sort of situation, where they're getting a lot of backing from the government. And then on the other hand, in their defense, Dan Collins is often pointing out that especially in the financial services sector, you have Ant Financial and other giants, Alibaba, Alipay, and they're starting to compete with, the state enterprise. Or they were until Jack Ma then went silent for some reason.
Yeah, it's comical because you read statements from the White House and in Washington saying that that sound like antagonistic toward China, but they're just listing companies on the exchange, and now they're the huge component of the exchange. It's really comical because the policymakers in D.C. either they don't know what they're doing, they're stupid, or they're in the pocket of some foreign powers.
Well, like I said at the top, there are lots of people now squatting in their homes, and they haven't paid their mortgages or their rent for the past year. And pretty much, if you listened in on them, they would justify it by hating the landlord, that the landlord doesn't deserve their money, the landlord is the scum, the landlord is the evil person, and they justify it. Same thing here. The debtor owes his creditor money, and they become like, that doesn't deserve my money, that, the same sort. They're becoming like anti-globalization activists, right? They don't want to have to pay the money that they owe, and you have to turn the person you owe money into the bad guy. That's the way it happens. And then
like Abbott and Costello, they hated Mr. Fields, I believe was their landlord.
Yeah.
So you got Biden and Powell are like the new Abbott and Costello.
Yeah.
They're like, Abbott, how come we're broke? And they're like, I don't know, Jackie Gleason. And, it's just a sitcom, basically. So America's got a sitcom for government, sadly, but also comically.
I think it's actually the best move to make is like to try to extend and pretend for this thing. If the fiat system is going to collapse, You might as well, act like Huffy Puffy. You're going to pay them one day, but just keep sending me those goods, and I'll pay you one day. Just like act like a comic
Or like
routine.
Wimpy from Popeye. For a hamburger today, I'll pay you next Tuesday. That's Joe Biden. Hey, China, send us over another 50,000 container ships full of stuff, and we'll pay you next Tuesday.
Hey, Max, everybody, if we know this system is about to end, they know the system is about to end. But if somebody's sending you essentially free goods, you got to keep it going, right? Like you got to, yeah, sure, list your companies on our stock exchange. Sure, bring it over here. Like you do whatever you can to make sure the landlord lets you stay another month for free.
So the U.S. are essentially squatters in the world economy.
Yeah, why not? Like if it's over, I would do that. That's my opinion. That's what I would do. I would take as much free rent as I possibly could. And that's what they're doing. The U.S. borrowed short-term money for free for the first time since March 2020. 4-week rates on bills are now the most negative since the height of the pandemic, with the U.S. paying down short-term debt and investors looking to park record amounts of cash.
Well, this is very important because, in other words, they say that there's deflation, and they say interest rates need to be near 0% because we need to do whatever we can to stimulate this moribund economy where the interest rates are so low. But that's the two-faced lie, because there is huge inflation, and the rates should be going up aggressively, as Paul Volcker did in the 70s, to stem the inflation. That's the way you run an economy. But to have the worst of both worlds and say, we're going to let hyperinflation take off while we're keeping Jamie Dimon's free open money spigot from the Fed at 0% and Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, right? That's the recipe for utter frickin' collapse. Hello, does anyone care?
Yeah, on the one hand, it's signaling deflation, but on the other hand, it's also signaling that banks like JP Morgan don't want to lend to ordinary small businesses because they know those are going to be crushed, perhaps, in Biden's tax plunder because the mega corporations won't. And it's also perhaps showing that the inflation is even going to get worse because probably this is the Fed just buying the Treasury's, debt. Like it's just the banana republicanism. We've covered that it's happening in Canada. It's happening in European Union. And so it's just it's the same thing. It's more QE. It's more shenanigans. It's more destruction of price signals. It's maybe testing the waters because it had always been argued that, the U.S. can't go negative because otherwise the dollar will die. So, that's my assessment.
All right, cool. Well, we're going to take a break. And when we come back, much more coming your way. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. It's time now to turn to the last man in New York City, Mitch Feierstein. Mitch, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Max. Great to see you.
All right. Now, you wrote a book called Planet Ponzi, which, of course, was a breakout international bestseller. And now we're living in Planet Ponzi. Everything is a Planet Ponzi, just like you predicted, Mitch. The people love it, too. Incomes are up 21% just on the transfer payments from the Fed printing money. Stock markets are hitting all-time highs. Annual consumer spending, the most ever, Mitch. Now, it looks like the roaring 20s. Or am I missing something? Or what's going on?
That's right. Party like it's 1929 or party like it's 1999. Look, Max, every financial crisis from the beginning of time has happened for the same reason. Too much debt, too much credit, too much leverage. And we discussed this in Planet Ponzi. Now, the revolving door between Washington and Wall Street is wide open. These are not just bubbles we're seeing. It's a Ponzi scheme that's created a mania in every market, unlike what we've ever seen before. We've got a combination between the governments and corporations or ideological fascists that are running the country. Truth no longer matters. We have comedians marshaling the narrative. We have fake money printing, fake Federal Reserve, fake economic data, fake shrinkflation, fake media, fake Hollywood, fake democracy, and fake justice system. So where the truth no longer matters in Silicon Valley, the oligarchs are the people who are pulling all the strings on behalf of China. You have a big problem because eventually the people are going to start to get fed up with this because they realize they're being lied to. you can only fool some of the people some of the time, not all the people all the time. And this Ponzi scheme is about to hit a wall, and these bubbles are about to explode.
Right. You know, you hit on something very interesting there. So going back to the 1920s, of course, we had a mania in the stock market, and it crashed, and it ushered in the Depression. But we have something kind of new since then. You know, starting in the 1980s and then gathering speed for decades, we had the securitization of everything in the economy. Everything that had an income or a yield attached to it was packaged, turned into a bond, sold, hypothecated, sold again. So we have a situation which is different than the 20s in that it's not just a stock or even maybe the bond market in a manic bubble, but everything's in a bubble, like lumber prices. $36,000 added to a cost of a new home just in the last year because lumber, because it's been securitized, because it's been financialized as part of the Ponzi, Planet Ponzi, is racing ahead out of control. Prices are up 15% in the US, nearly 40% in Canada for houses. Compared to the subprime crash, however, incomes are now up. Interest rates are at an all-time low. Fed is buying up the mortgage-backed securities. So it looks like the 20s, but it actually, structurally, it's a lot worse than the 1920s, Mitch.
Oh yes, Max, it's definitely worse, and this is going to definitely end extremely badly for everybody. This fake money printing and thinking that MMT, magic money tree, or modern monetary theory, that you're capable of just printing infinite quantums of money without hyperinflation or other ramifications is just the most bizarre thing I've ever heard of in my life. Look, I've said this before, US dollar hegemony is coming to an end. China will probably come up with some kind of commodities along with a bunch of other countries with an exchangeable commodities-based fungible exchange for, I don't know, silver, copper, gold, oil, some kind of basket of commodities, because printing paper that's absolutely worthless, people are going to realize this is worthless. Why would I buy this debt? And then eventually you're going to have a bond buyer's strike, and you're going to have Bondageddon, Armageddon in the bond markets, which we haven't seen yet because you've still got people that are sheepling along and listening to the narratives. But believe me, this is going to get pretty ugly pretty quickly when people realize that this is the biggest Ponzi scheme in history. Now, the book that I wrote obviously was a little bit before its time, but everything in it still holds, and this Ponzi scheme is ready to blow.
Right. Now let's talk about China for a second. You mentioned it. China still takes our paper money. People still buy stuff. That money ends up going to China. The incomes in America in the last few years went from 19 trillion to 24 trillion. That's a $5 trillion increase based on transfer payments. That is to say, money printing from the Fed. And of course, they went out and bought stuff at Walmart and other big box stores, which means it just went over to China. So China is still accepting the paper money from America. And the question is it, when are they just going to say, we're not going to take that money anymore? And concurrently, I have a part of this question is that half of the Fortune 500 now in the U.S. are Chinese companies. So is there a game plan to kind of play possum to say, we'll take your funny money and we're going to buy half of the S&P 500 until such time as we own the S&P 500, and then we won't take your funny money anymore? What's going on, Mitch?
Well, I don't think China can pull that stunt because they're too exposed to the dollar. But I think that they will come out with a parallel currency to replace the dollar. I think, look, the U.S. is pretty much a one-party system, and they want tribalism. So they want the two tribes of Republican and Democrats fighting with each other, while the biggest plunder in economic history happens. It favors China. And the oligarchs of Silicon Valley point to this better than anybody else. Facebook, Twitter, Google, they all censor people in America because they want 3 billion new customers in China. So they're in China's bailiwick right now. The same thing with Elon Musk over at Tesla. China rocks. Remember that quote? And he's moved everything to China. So China has probably won the war without a shot being fired, because the politicians are purchased by China. Nobody, and I said it on your program a couple of years ago, that China's the issue. Russia's not an issue at all. So the problem with China is nobody has the ability to say anything because they're all panicked and afraid to make a comment. Like New Zealand and the Five Eyes took the cash And now the other four members of Five Eyes are pretty upset with New Zealand for doing that. And it's very difficult because China's throwing bundles of cash out there.
Yeah, I was thinking that at some point, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac could be sold to China, and then China would be America's biggest landlord. And that might ring some bells, or maybe not. Speaking of having people's bell rung, Joe Biden wants to raise corporate taxes to 28% from 21% and double the capital gains tax to over 40%. This doesn't sound like a winning formula to compete with China. Mitch, what do you think?
I don't know. I don't think he's running the show. I don't think he knows what's going on. I think this is Bernie Sanders and Kamala Harris and AOC that are behind the scenes here. But this is going to end in disaster because the economy is not better. There is no recovery. It's a fake recovery, just like we have the fake shrinkflation, and they're lying about the inflation numbers, the employment numbers. All you have is a Fed printing money, and this money has made it look like there's improvement, but this is as good as it gets. The beginning of this year was as good as you're going to see. Everything's going to have a precipitous decline from now on. And raising taxes is just going to put fuel on the fire and make things worse because it doesn't help profits. It doesn't help. We don't have productivity. All we have is money printing. And in order for an economy to thrive, we need to make products. We're making nothing. We're spending money that we're printing. And that's the only thing that sustained this ridiculous, farcical recovery that the Federal Reserve claims that we have.
Right now, Warren Buffett has underperformed the S&P 500 for the past 20 years. He and Charlie Munger now say that it is Bitcoin, not fiat, which is not only, quote, disgusting, but a threat to the interest of civilization. Which do you think is the greater threat? Charlie Munger and his fiat or Bitcoin? Mitch?
I think Janet Yellen running the Treasury is a bigger threat than all of them. I mean, look, she couldn't get it right at the Federal Reserve. I did a presentation in Switzerland via Zoom, and there were a couple slides. Here's one of them about Janet Yellen when she was at the central bank. There's too much corruption in central banks right now. She was paid $8 million by lobbying organizations and big banks before she got the position at Treasury. So who's she looking out for? She's already said she's going to declare war on Bitcoin. I don't know exactly what that means. But as I've said many times on your program, Bitcoin is an alternative asset class. The volatility is extremely high, and I think it's binary. So it can go to 1 million or it can go to 0. And so people should have diversity in their portfolio. Bitcoin should be a part of it, but they shouldn't buy into any investment if they can't afford to lose money on it in the short term, because there's no guarantees. One thing that I can tell you is the valuations of the stock markets in Apple at 2.4 trillion and these companies that are valued over $2 trillion is just the most bizarre thing in the history of this universe. The same thing with Tesla. It's never made a profit. They make profits selling carbon credits, and they make profits with trading Bitcoin and doing other things, but not selling cars, which is their primary business. Elon Musk himself took $100 billion. He's made $100 billion in calendar 2020. So this is an indication that we've seen enough froth to make this the peak bubble that's turned into a mania right now.
I'm going to take a wild digression here, because I've known you for a long time. We have a lot of chats and stuff, so I'm going to go with this. So you're a New Yorker. I'm a New Yorker. And the news that Elon Musk hosting Saturday Night Live, which is a New Yorker thing, caused the cast members to panic and suggest they wouldn't be on the show for some social justice warrior thing. I'm not sure exactly what. But doesn't that kind of signal to you, as it does to me, that America, and New York is kind of the cultural center of America, has lost its mojo? Like, this is so sad, Mitch. What are your thoughts?
Well, look, I think that you've got this social justice. They don't understand that there's a difference between justice in terms of injustice for all, and in terms of liberty, and in terms of democracy and social justice. This is just, what happens when you have 40 years of indoctrination in the school system. And it's infected the corporations across America. Lisa Jackson, who was in charge of the EPA, an administrator of the EPA under Obama, now is at Apple. All these people, it's part of the Washington Wall Street pay to play. So revolving door. So they go to corporations like Apple and they run the policies there after being, uber liberal. And now it's all about social justice. So am I shocked that Elon Musk is going to be on Saturday Night Live? Well, he bought his way in there. He's one of the richest guys in the world. Will his empire come crumbling down? But look, he used the internet to get where he is. He used hype on social media to get where he is. That's all it is. It's hype, smoke and mirrors. And when it all comes crashing down, there are going to be a lot of people crying.
Lorne Michaels might get a call from the SEC. Wouldn't that be interesting? Anyway, we got to wrap it up, Mitch. Soon we'll see you in person again. Thanks for being on the Keiser Report.
Thanks for having me again, Max.
All right, well, that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I want to thank our guest, Mitch Feierstein, author of Planet Ponzi. Until next time, bye, y'all.